So obviously I've been working with Fulbrighter for about a year now, and part of my role is to desperately encourage people to post and engage with the platform. You seem to need no prompting. You've been bugging me for 5 months, desperate to get involved. Why do you want to get involved in that? What so excites you about it?
So on the eve of my Fulbright, I decided that it was time to say goodbye to Facebook. For the previous 3 years, I'd been really wanting to do that. Ever since at the start of my time at university, there was an incident in my first year where my brother, who's a very open person and he posts a lot on Facebook, he was the victim of a cyberbullying attack. And it really tore down his life, really for a good amount of time. And it just made me realize that this platform was no longer really a space for constructive dialogue, and unfortunately, it was just too far gone into a culture of sort of disinformation and lack of trust. And compound that with the fact that there's a company sitting on top that's stoking this outrage and incentivizing a lot of this behavior in order to harvest data and then sell ads based on it. It was really something I was hoping to do, and going to America was was a new start for me and an opportunity to try some different things, which we can talk more about. Fulbrighter represents in many ways an antithesis to a lot of those problems. It's a platform with trust built in due to the fact that users have to be verified individuals from the Fulbright community. It's no ads, so it's just content from real good people.
And you've talked specifically about Facebook there. Do you see it as a broader problem with open social media networks in general, or do you see Facebook as particularly pernicious?
I do see Facebook as particularly pernicious, and I mean, I do see it as particularly pernicious for the following reason. So I think that many of the problems are similar across the platforms, but the difference with many of the other platforms is that they're more honest about the facts of public social media. So, for example, look at Instagram. I know it's owned by Facebook Inc. now, but they're honest about the fact that social media is not a space for, it's not an egalitarian space. They encourage people who are posting better content to rise up and be followed by more people, whereas Facebook has this pretense of egalitarianism and honesty, and you call each other your friends, and even though it's a smaller number, often people are in the region of thousands, 2,000 friends. That's still too many for those connections to be strong. And in that sense, Facebook felt like the most pernicious mixture of great promise and little delivery.
So you previously worked on the first week flip phone idea, and you still observe a social media detox every month. Do you feel you miss out during those times?
Yeah, good question. I don't feel that I miss out, but that's probably because of the fact that I did this challenge. So just a little background for those who don't know, in May of 2018, my friend Tashar challenged us to make a podcast about what life was like without a smartphone. in 2018, and we decided to do it for 12 months consecutively, every first week of the month. And 12 months later, we'd had dozens of individuals try this experience to really great impact. And many of them report a change in their attitude towards social media afterward, where they had taken steps to make themselves less psychologically reliant on the dopamine hits, which it's designed to give you. And essentially, like, I've been through that now around 20 or so times. So I'm kind of really well trained now to kind of like ignore any potential buzz I get from an Instagram post doing well. I'm kind of like, no, it's not real. Like, it's so I don't feel like I do miss out so much. And also, to be frank, these days where everything is so well documented by so many people, you don't necessarily have to be wielding a smartphone to be documented during that time. And also, to be frank, it's I don't really believe in instantaneous like social media experience anyway. So any content I do gather during that week, I will post out at the end of the week. And it's actually something that I advocate is people to get serious about curating and scheduling posts across platforms.
So you've used the term real there, and you talked earlier about the concept of a friend in Facebook and that doesn't mean anything. I'm a very late convert to a smartphone. I had a BlackBerry for a very long time, which did nothing on it except send messages and take calls. Eventually, I found I was missing out. Discussions were happening in WhatsApp. Discussions were happening on Twitter, Facebook, within my friendship circle around events and activities that I couldn't engage with without having a smartphone. Do you still feel that? And is that why you're still only going for a detox 1 week per month rather than sustaining it for a lengthy time?
I think it's true that that if it's sustained much longer than that, you will begin to feel like you are absolutely missing out on certain things. So, for example, for myself as an aspiring performing artist, like in both in the theater and on screen, it's really important for me to have a presence on this this what has become almost an industry standard for the arts and visual content, which is Instagram. And I do feel that having a presence there is really important. But to be honest with you, that's a platform that's less about instantaneous interaction and more like higher level like sharing of information. In terms of that instantaneous piece, I've taken steps over the years, and I think catalyzed by the flip phone weeks, to essentially come to the quite specific practice amongst me and my real friends, which is that if it's an instantaneous conversation that's needed, then instantaneous it shall be. By which I mean there's an opportunity for back and forth like we have now on this call, and we don't. I simply refuse to engage in what's called instant messaging, which is, it's not really instant. So I do miss out on WhatsApp group chats, but missing out, to be completely frank, show me the WhatsApp group chat, and I'll tell you whether I'm missing out. Is what I would say.
Very good. So you've touched on it there about your interest in creativity and theatre practices. So I was reading up on you before this. Your background is somewhat strange, shall we say. So it was PPE at Oxford, which is politics, philosophy, economics. For those who don't know, that's typically the path for slightly awkward, wonky people to go into politics or senior management. You've then gone off to do an MA in computational science, was it? But you've also got the theatre background. Can you talk about how those various interests kind of meld into one and how they helped you shape your ideas on social media?
Yeah, I'm not sure about meld into one, but I definitely feel grateful, incredibly grateful for the range of influences I've had in my education and my life. Um, Institutionally, I'm so blessed to have been trained in kind of radical thinking around philosophy, which really encourages us to think differently, and then like a solid grounding in computer science on my Fulbright time, which allows me to think about questions about technology. But for me, the key has actually been the third piece of the puzzle, as you mentioned, which is my experience in the performing arts. I I think that you can have all of the the most wonderful ideas, but unless you can communicate those out to other people and engage them, it really does ring hollow. Which is why I think that it's really important, the fact that in the end we opened up the first week flip phone challenge to other people to get involved, because if we had just kept it as these two Oxford guys talking about their kind of weird idiosyncratic like lifestyle choice, I don't think that would have had any impact. But the fact that I was able to go and stand up in front of a classroom of people in Florida and say like, hey, you guys should give this a go, I think that really helped them feel inspired to actually take some action. And seeing that for me, seeing people and then engaging with them afterwards about their experiences is just so much more engaging for me. So that's why I love live performance, and why I'm choosing a path into the performing arts.
And it feels like you're almost riding a wave that hopefully will be coming up behind you, of thinking about places like Stanford not as places for science computer geeks, but a place where they need to talk about philosophy and ethics and morals, because the way technology is going, these issues are becoming crucial. The idea that you have to communicate to the public and persuade the public that the technological interventions are beneficial is more important than ever, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true, that we do live in a time where there is this increasing divide between technology and real life, broadly speaking. So that can be thought of as people finding it difficult to bring those two parts of their lives together. It can be thought of as the like kind of new knowledge gap between the kind of tech savvy and those who aren't. And I think that it is a really, really important goal for anyone who is passionate about social inclusion and progress, is how can we engage as many people as possible to be actively involved in making the most of the opportunities with technology. And that's why one of my pursuits over the coming years. Musicals don't tend to fund themselves, so I've got to be diversifying my activities a little. So I have a company called Agile Education, where we run kind of code camps for mainly 16 to 18-year-old teenagers. And the aim is to get them excited to be not only consumers of technology, because most 16 or 18-year-olds are voracious consumers. One of our kids in Florida was enjoying his Snapchat and Instagram around 12 hours a day, according to his screen tracker. But also creators, and even like that doesn't necessarily mean we're expecting them to to launch their apps on the App Store and do incredibly well, but at least to get in the mindset of the designers of the technologies. And once you've done that, you actually become a much more empowered consumer, and you can think more mindfully about the products that you're using.
So it's interesting you talk about the future and the new generation. I'm in the slightly strange generation where I grew up without a computer. I remember getting our first computer, and I see what the world is like now. Do you think in terms of social media and technology, we've reached a somewhat stable point when things are going to settle now? Or do you see over the next 5-10 years still a massive shift going on? Could you see Facebook shutting down in 5 years to be replaced by a new social network? What do you think is going to be happening in the next few years?
Yeah, I think it would be slightly foolhardy of me to try to see forward. I will say this though. I was recently watching back a really powerful piece of cinema from 2013 called The Big Short, and it tells the tale of the folks in the run-up to the 2007 financial crisis who felt that something big change-wise was on the horizon. And Steve Eisman, who is portrayed brilliantly by Steve Carell, talks about this almost Noah's Ark-like feeling of being on the boat and being safe, because he has shorted the mortgage markets, but a lot of people around hearing the the screams of a lot of people around, and him saying that doesn't make me feel better to know that other people are suffering. To be completely honest with you, I frankly share some of that sentiment. It's obviously less stakes are less high, but I will say this: it makes me incredibly sad when I see kids like those mentioned using social media apps on their phones for 12 hours a day, because that's their time, and their time is their lifeblood, and a lot of people are spending it in ways that they may start to regret in the coming years. And I wouldn't be surprised if consumer trends do take sudden changes based upon there may well be a moment in which consumer behavior does drastically change. And thinking about the future is something I'm trying to do in my arts work, and my musical Snowflakes in SoCal actually imagines a future where teenagers start to realize that they're spending too much time on their virtual reality headsets. So definitely something that I'm thinking about a lot, and I hope other people will increasingly as well.
I think that thinking of the future, that kind of brings us on to Fulbrighter, which is a very, very small thing in itself, but is modeling a different way of doing social media. I've likened it before to Facebook and LinkedIn. It is very like those, but different to those, it is a closed community. It is a community of people who share something in common and have a similar global outlook. What particularly excites you about Fulbrighter as a concept?
Yeah, so it does come back to what I said earlier. Quite simply, like you said, it's a closed community, which means that person there is a verified individual who has reputation on the line. So people really tend to raise their game in those circumstances. And I'll say this: it's sometimes there may be, there may be a claim that that idea is elite or elitist, to have a barrier to entry like that. But to be honest with you, I think that it's frankly a more honest representation of how people conduct their social lives. Homophily is probably the by which I mean people attracted to folks who are similar to them, is probably like the most repeated finding in modern sociology, particularly in the digital space. So there's firstly that to notice, that there tends to be a lot of clustering and echo chambering on the public platforms anyway. And actually, I would argue that what's interesting about Fulbright scholars as a kind of arbitrary, like sort of in or out mechanism, is actually that it actually encourages a very diverse community. Diversity is built into the lifeblood of the Fulbright project, because of, by its nature, it being an exchange program between many different countries in the US. It is necessarily an extremely diverse body of people. And, I'm just really excited about the range of people that I will get a chance to interface with and interview in our series going into 2020, because, it may well be the case that we don't have a single individual from the same country twice. And that's fantastic. So I think that so there's that, and then obviously the fact that there's no ads is just a better experience, and means that less bad practices are going to be happening in the background, we hope.
I think one of the things that's been quite interesting about the launch of Fulbrighter is both administrative staff in commissions and end users are probably more aware than ever before about their data and how it's used. And if I'm not clear about that, I'm getting pushback from people of all ages. I think that's a really good sign. I think we've kind of sleepwalked into a state where we give our data away quite freely, but hopefully it's being turned a bit of a corner and people start thinking more critically about these issues.
Yeah, I think no, it's great to hear you say that, and I think that it's been like a real pleasure to sort of interface with you during the series in 2019. I really admire the fact that the series was supported and facilitated by the Fulbright Network, but with a very light touch, in that you were very open to my editorial independence and frankly, like, critical perspectives, and I guess that again speaks to like some really great core values about the Fulbright community. And look, it's not like it's, as you say, it's one small piece in a larger diet of every Fulbrighter's social media, and I think that we will increasingly see that. I think, as you say, Fulbright is leading the way in this idea of more mindfully curated digital spaces. Not just the WhatsApp group from like Amsterdam 2017 that's just persisted. It's a more mindful approach to curating like smaller social groupings online, which, as I already discussed, Robin Dunbar's work is a more humane way of going about social networking online.
Yeah, I think the concept of two concepts, they're mindful curation and also value driven. And by value driven, I don't mean necessarily politics or values with a capital V, but just that core sense of this being a community, it's not owned by anyone, it's not manipulated by anyone, it is a bit of an open space. So you've mentioned there a couple of times the work you've been doing with Fulbrighter over the last 5 months. You've been blogging regularly for us in the Fulbrighter networking series. Could you say a little bit about what you hope to achieve from that series and some of the topics you've covered so far?
Yeah, networking.
It's a terrible pun. I'm not going to...
Note the space. It's essentially the inspiration was the observation that people were hearing about Fulbrighter getting this social network, and it occurred to me Fulbrighter is already a social network. If anything, I describe it in the subtitle as the OG, by which I mean the original social network. And in many ways, it's remarkable that 60 years before Facebook, it was truly creating a global network, by which I mean clusters of people bonded by, as you said, shared values and curated interactions. And I just was so excited about the idea of applying this the word social network now being used in the modern sense of a website that you go to post pics and at your friends, because as we've discussed, my skepticism as to the efficacy of those modern social networks, which are often so wildly optimistic in their aims, that I was curious to bring a critical lens to how the progress of the app went over time, to allow people to reflect on hey, how's it going? How can we improve it? I will say that arguably that aspect of it hasn't been as necessary due to the diligent efforts of yourself and the rest of the team, frankly, to have that open stance and encourage feedback, etc. But I will say, I think that it's always tough to engage people with real feedback, and there's something really special about people publicly declaring their opinions and feedback in order to generate more discussion, as opposed to say a private survey. It definitely brings a different flavor. I'm also excited about the fact that it's one of the few pieces of content on the platform that exists publicly to the whole internet, because whilst I believe we're in the tens of thousands of registered members, a large fraction of those and an even larger group of Fulbrighters are not engaged on the platform. And I would love to try and inspire not only folks already on the platform to be commenting more, and also to encourage those folks to try coming over to the platform and commenting with each other, because I've got to say that when I have had those, or provoked, or being blessed with those more meaningful interactions, it's been really, really rewarding.
So, as you mentioned feedback, we've just done our survey of users, and the response to that has been a real enthusiasm to engage more strongly with the platform, but sometimes a frustration with the interface enabling that, but also a wariness about what they should be saying, how they should be delivering it. So that's certainly something we want to be looking at over the next year, to reassure people that here are channels to engage, what improvements can we make to the platform to help that engagement. Is there anything that you would suggest that, as from your experience so far, that we could do to enhance the platform?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what you guys can do, I think that that's like an ongoing conversation about improving the user interface, user experience, broadly speaking. I think that whilst that is important, I will say that I'm an extreme case, but I would have commented and pushed, my content if it had been looking worse or if it had been looking better. But for many people, they do have certain expectations because, let's just put it this way, like posting out on a public space, even if that is it's semi-public, even if it's commenting on one of my articles, I know that we had really great engagement as from readers in terms of like when people got onto the articles, they were spending an average of 4 minutes on it and reading through to the end like 90% of the time. And yet from our point of view, we saw, only a small handful of people actually typing into the comment box, hey, like, w4rner, like, I agree with you, like this, or like, nah, you're an idiot, like machine learning is the future. And it's something that I'm always trying to figure out is why comment. And it's I think that like there are a lot of downsides, like in people's minds, they're leaving this permanent digital trace to thousands of people. So I think you really do have to give them incentives to want to do that. And then like consider that, that a lot of those downsides are a lot mitigated if people feel that they are in an even more tight-knit and focused space. And I mean that firstly because the risks are lower of various like long tail bad outcomes of like public shaming, for example. But I also mean focused in that like the the content is almost guided or suggested by the context. So one of the reasons I think Instagram has really superseded Facebook among young people is because format is really strongly dictated by the platform. Like you can't have links. Everything's a square. And it turns out that the wisdom from that is people don't like making choices. And it comes back almost to Mark Zuckerberg's like, wear the same clothes because there's only so many choices you can make each day. So I think, templatizing is a really important concept. To be frank, you can think of the networking series as a templatized piece of content. It's long form. Most people won't be shooting for that. But I think that's been certainly has allowed me to be consistently out there. And I'm really excited. I was at a rate of 2 a month in that last year. And, you've got to be realistic. And, we've decided this year, we'll go for 1 a month, but we'll be more ambitious about, bringing another voice into each of those conversations. So, I guess it's going to be up for each person to think, hey, like, how high do I want to be aiming in terms of audience? Like, do I want to be posting on the global feed, or do I want to find my, my private community, be that country or industry? And then like there, how can I be creative at like finding a routine or some form of like template for myself, or like engaging in other folks that are doing that. And I know that you and me are talking about a couple of ideas of some like templates for content that might be something that we look to innovate with, even in the networking series, for example, how we might do kind of like Humans of Fulbright, like photo series. And that might be something we experiment with the interviewees on this series.
And I think just from listening to you, it also strikes me that even the term comment is actually perhaps not the best term, because comment almost suggests a one-way response to something that someone's read. Actually, it is more about conversing. I know that you, as someone who writes articles, are very interested in not just being given a like, because that doesn't really set value, but having some intellectual input. And I know the concept of a conversation is something you want to pick up further this year.
Absolutely, Rob. I was really delighted with there was a couple of Fulbrighters, I believe John Bannon and Khadija Ujani. You know, these are two individuals I haven't met in person, and yet I feel like I do actually have a sense of them, much more than people I usually do, you know, who I haven't met IRL. And I think that's because you know, because because there was a back and forth. This is partly an artifact of my like quite ambitious like commitment to responding to every single public comment that someone makes, because in the past I was so afraid of doing that. I've wanted to just it's such a terrible feeling to be left hanging. I've just like decided that in my life, like I'm just always gonna make myself that person. Like I've just come to terms with that, and I will always be. I'll never leave someone hanging. But yeah, no, just from those interactions with those people, it was clear that you know, that when there is that little bit more of an intellectual spark, and I think it was Khadija particularly wrote like a kind of long form response, and you know, this is something to think about, is the fact that medium.com, the best long form content platform, actually don't call their comments, they're responses, and they are considered articles treated equally as other articles that you can clap and respond to. And I think that's a better way of seeing it. And, you know, it's hard to deny, like, you know, I remember Khadija's piece. It was a little long form piece in its own right about how my article had like provoked this sort of self-introspection about, you know, about machine learning, which is a concept I'm familiar with in the social sciences, applied to her own research in the physical sciences. And on that note about, you know, the breadth of domains that Fulbrighters like discourse around, and in particular that technology is now touching, it became clear to me that you know, that conversational aspect needs to be brought up from that, you know, comment section actually into the pieces themselves. And I think this was hit home most clearly when I saw a you know, repeated post from a Moroccan Fulbrighter called Ito Ajani, who has a really inspiring story around you know, being a someone with lack of vision, and being a non-traditional student whose education came a little later than a lot of other Fulbrighters, you know, talking about like accessibility on the web, and in particular on the platform. And, you know, me sort of reflecting, like, yeah, you know, I've, you know, we studied accessibility in our UI UX design class, but, you know, here we have, you know, a Fulbright scholar in web accessibility. Like, why would we want to hear my thoughts on that? Would much rather hear Itu Ajani's. So, you know, that's an example of someone that I would love to engage with one of the interviews in the following year. But to be honest, like, let me just put it out there now to anyone watching or reading, like, please do be in touch if you think that you have some expertise in an aspect of a specific aspect relating to the Fulbrighter network as a project, broadly speaking. So that could be the technical aspect of building a social media product, or the social aspects of how we can incentivize engagement, etc., or perhaps some of the more like bigger picture philosophical or like geopolitical aspects. So you know, I really encourage you know, any Fulbrighters out there who are interested, in reaching out. And we have, the DM feature, so why not make use of it to either myself or Rob.
I think I would just echo that point. I know it can sometimes be daunting when you're faced with the news and reflections area, you don't quite know what to write. Actually, having a conversation with you is a much more relaxed way to explore. And the ideas don't have to be the finished ideas. They don't have to be polished research. Part of the value of Fulbright is it is a space where people can have those work in progress conversations to help shape their own ideas.
Absolutely, Rob. And I think that that's definitely being borne out in this series so far. I mean, I just described how this idea of pivoting to this interview style came about in December. And before that, it pivoted from just me tapping down stuff from on my profile to then, Rob inviting it to be showcased on the news and reflections page. And to be honest with you, for me, I'm as I already said, I'm not an expert in all of these topics. So definitely that kind of work in progress feeling is really important. And that's actually one of the most promising things about social media is because of the opportunity for interaction. We can iterate on our thoughts. So definitely would encourage folks to come and have a chat and talk through some of these really interesting topics.
Great. So we began this conversation talking a bit about you as an individual and your background. To return to the concept of you, what's next for Laurence? What have you got planned for the next couple of years?
Yeah. So I like that next couple of years because it was just over 2 years on my Fulbright, and that was kind of that was a lot of sort of experimentation. I really just tried a lot, both taking away and adding things in my life. So obviously, you've already talked about Facebook and then a smartphone 1 week a month. But then in terms of a period of kind of creative energy, there was a lot. There was the podcast. I did my video diary series, Tales from a Windy City, and really just threw a lot of stuff at the wall. And I think that it's clear to me that I need to try and focus in on some pretty specific areas. And I think that what that is increasingly looking like is the fact that I'm a creative individual. So I'm always going to want to be innovating and trying to reach audiences with that work. And I'm also someone with some expertise and reputation in the area of technology. So I think it's going to be the case that, whether I'm, if I'm on stage as Cerulean, which is my stage name for my music, I'm going to be trying to, where I'm reaching a wider audience, I'm going to be trying to provoke some thoughts around technology and social media, etc. And if I'm writing code for my apps, or I'm on the Fulbrighter network talking about social media with a more tighter niche audience, I'm going to be trying to bring some creative energy and trying to inspire people to be a little more performative and creative. So I think it's hard to tell exactly, but I guess that's the kind of next couple of years is try to be innovating on the intersection of technology and the arts.
And that comes back to our earlier point about how you've melded all the various disciplines together. Some things have worked, some things haven't, but it's a constant process of development and improvement, really.
That's it, Rob. That's all we can hope for.
Well, great. Thank you for the conversation today. I think it's been really interesting. I'm sure we'll put somewhere in the article links to your social media feeds, but not Facebook, obviously, so people can come and follow you and engage more with your work. And of course, as you've said, you would encourage anyone to get in touch with you or me if you've got ideas about Fulbrighter, digital technology, social media more generally. It'd be great to hear from people.